That highlight, Eric Nadel, voice of the Rangers, headed to the World Series, something I never thought of when I was a fan back when they first arrived at Arlington in 1972, and prior to that as a Washington Senators fan. Eric, thanks for your time, and you have been a part of so many memorable moments in baseball throughout the time you've been the broadcaster you are. But how about this? I know you're part of the Baseball Hall of Fame, but what about the Texas Sports Hall of Fame coming up May 21st? When you got that call, what did that mean to you?
I was really excited. Texas has been so good to me, and for me to be going in, with people like Brad Sham and Randy Galloway, who not only are close friends of mine, but who were kind of mentors to me when I first came to Dallas. It's a tremendous honor.
What's the best piece of advice you got from either of them?
Well, Galloway really taught me how to behave on the road. I guess that's the right way to put it. He kind of took me under his wing, and the most important thing he taught me was that sleep is underrated.
Nothing about that shock.
That's
all of that. Yes,
that is.
You gotta get your sleep, but it's a question of when. And so Gallo was pretty good about that. We would go out back then, and we were like 30 years old back then, and we would go out and we would have a good time after the games. But he always would wake up early to run, and he would call my room and make sure that I would go out and run with him. And then there was usually time for a nap before we actually had to go to work. But that was really important. With Brad, I wound up working with Brad for 3 years, when he and Barry Switzer weren't getting along, and Brad didn't do the Cowboys for 3 years. And that was just a great relationship, just to see how Brad worked, how he prepared, how he related to players was something that I think I got a lot out of. And, they're both, so good at what they did. And to see Randy go from being, a beat writer to a columnist and, an award-winning talk show host, that was really fun for me. And Brad, of course, is so versatile. He's done a million different sports where, I've basically done nothing but baseball for 42 years now out of the 44 that I've been doing this job.
Was hockey how you started, or was hockey how you got your name out there?
Hockey was how I started, and that was really my goal. As a kid growing up in New York, I was fascinated with Marv Albert, who was doing the New York Ranger games back then. And, I would get my homework done every day the Rangers were playing so I could listen to Marv do the games. The games weren't on TV then. Marv would just do the home games, and they were just on the radio. The road games were on TV, and he didn't do those. He would stay home. He had quite a gig. He did the Knicks home games and the Rangers home games. So all he had to do was go to Madison Square Garden every night. But I would get my homework done in time to hear him do those Ranger games. And when people would ask me what I was going to do when I grow up, I would tell them, hey, I'm going to be the voice of the Rangers. And I was right. I just wasn't specific enough.
You got the Rangers right, but not the sport. But and you've been around for, you mentioned, 40 years or so doing baseball. And now you've got a young team, a new team, although they've got the new free agents that they signed, and it's been kind of a rocky start. Your thoughts about where they are right now?
Yeah, certainly not where we would want them to be, at this point in the season, 8-14. Could always be worse considering, how bad the pitching was for the first 2 weeks of the season. But now I'm getting optimistic because for the last 10 days, the Rangers have pitched well. And if they can pitch well, they're going to be okay because they're going to score runs. Offenses will always have their ups and downs. But there were so many question marks on the pitching staff coming into the season. One of the keys being Dane Dunning, who has really blossomed, in his last few starts. He, along with John Gray and Martin Perez, would give the Rangers, three pretty solid guys at the top of the rotation, assuming that, John Gray can stay healthy. He's only made 2 starts so far.
Were you surprised about Willie Calhoun?
I was surprised we got to this point with Willie. I certainly didn't expect him to be hitting 130 at this point in the season. Given where the club is now, though, I wasn't surprised that he was the guy optioned out, when it came time to trim the roster down to 26.
Eric, the Rangers franchise, the new stadium, you've seen now Arlington Stadium, the ballpark in Arlington, which of course became Globe Life Park, and now what you have now. How much difference is the new one as far as your broadcast, where you are compared to the old one?
Well, it's gotten worse in each park for us in terms of the location, and that's just the way it is right now. The economics of baseball kind of dictate that we no longer get those super prime low broadcast locations like we used to. They're selling luxury suites there, and I understand, the club's got to make money. So we're higher than we were at the old park, and that was higher than we were at the original park. And it's interesting, the first park was out on I-30. The second one was south of that, and the new one is south of that. I think the Rangers are eventually trying to move to Waco. They're just doing it really slowly.
In due time, man. In due time. Have you seen the Nolan Ryan documentary debut, the premiere?
I haven't seen it. They showed it at the ballpark yesterday after the game, but we left right after the game to go to Philadelphia, where I am now. So I haven't seen it. I was interviewed for the movie along with seemingly hundreds of other people, and I haven't seen it. I was told that I am in the movie briefly. I didn't know if I'd be left on the cutting room floor. I kind of expected I would be, but somebody said they saw the movie and that I was in it briefly.
Do you have a favorite Nolan moment personally? I mean, there were a lot of them. I'm sure going to the ballpark just to call a game that he was pitching made it at least that much more exciting that day.
Yeah, every day was special when Nolan pitched, but my number one Nolan story is I interviewed Randy Johnson one day, a pregame show, and he clearly didn't want to do it. I don't know why he said yes. He kind of rolled his eyes when I asked him, and he agreed to do it. And every question I asked him, he kind of answered with an attitude like, boy, that's a stupid question, but I'm going to answer it. And when the show was airing, apparently Nolan was listening to it in the clubhouse. And when I took the commercial break in the middle of the show, the phone rang in the broadcast booth. And the engineer answered it, and Nolan said, "Yeah, this is Nolan. Let me talk to Eric." And I got on, and I said, "Hey, Nolan, what's up?" He said, "I've just got one question for you. What did you do to tick old Randy off?" He said, "I'm really enjoying this. I can't wait to hear the second half." And he hung up the phone.
You know what I thought you were going to say? That he, as a veteran, knowing you as well, was going to call and then say, "Let me talk to Randy," and get Randy to loosen the hell up.
Yeah, I wish he had done that. He did give Randy a couple of tips on pitching that apparently were very helpful to him. But yeah, he delighted in the way I was no doubt squirming doing that interview.
Eric, I was, remember when you, I guess years and years ago, began to learn Spanish, and there was the whole Juan Gonzalez reasoning behind that of just being able, with so many Latin American Spanish-speaking players in the league, wanted to be able to converse more. I was curious, though, what was the, I guess, best teaching tool for you? If you had advice for somebody trying to learn a second language, I guess speaking to native speakers would be one area. Was that most of it for you, or how did you kind of learn?
Yeah, that's how you take the big jump. By going into total immersion, traveling for me in Latin America. I actually went to language school in Venezuela for a couple of weeks and, spoke nothing but Spanish for 2 weeks. But you have to get to a point of some competence before you do that. You can go as a beginner to one of those language schools. But I think the most important thing is to go to another country once you get some sort of a working knowledge of the language. To get started, programs like people are using now, Rosetta Stone and things like that, are good. But I think it's really important to have a teacher who can correct your pronunciation and to be able to listen to somebody who's speaking, in a native tongue. Like I had a teacher who was Puerto Rican, which is very similar to the Spanish that the Dominicans and the Cubans and the Venezuelans are speaking, so it would help me in baseball. Because so many people I hear, get a kind of a beginning command of the language in terms of understanding the words and having some vocabulary and some grammar, but they don't sound right. Their pronunciation is off. And if you have a teacher working with you right from the start, you have a much better chance. Especially if you have some kind of an American regional accent. Like I had a New York accent, people in Texas, it's really helpful if you have, a personal teacher, if you can afford it, or take some group classes where you're actually in person, and talking back and forth to the teacher.
How much did the players appreciate you doing that?
They love it. The guys from Latin America, I think it really gives me an advantage in gaining some trust with them. Also, the fact that I've now been to all of their countries and can talk about that, I think is really important. There are players who don't really have the patience because I have to make them slow down if I'm going to understand them. And I'm sure I'm making grammatical errors, and my pronunciation's pretty good, but I'm sure it's not perfect. But they really do appreciate your trying.
One of the other names inducted is the late Frank Lieber. He, of course, one of the great names in Dallas. You mentioned Brad Sham and Randy Galloway. You got a Frank Lieber story?
Great one, because Frank was doing the games my first year. Frank did some of the games on TV. He was doing a lot of national stuff for CBS. He was doing all the major golf tournaments and, the NCAA tournament and stuff like that. But when he was available on the weekends, he would do the Ranger games. And we did a game one day in Kansas City. And when we came on the air, I don't know how this happened, but instead of hearing ourselves in our headsets, we were hearing the Kansas City announcers in our headsets. And I'm like freaking out. It was maybe the fifth or sixth game I'd ever done. And, I'm just trying to survive. And meanwhile, Frank, he just shrugged his shoulders. He turned down the volume on his headset and just went on as if nothing had happened. He taught me so much about poise and calm and not getting rattled that, I was forever grateful to him.
All of us, no matter what market, no matter if you broadcast play-by-play, a talk show, whatever, there's always going to be times when the technical thing just goes south. I mean, it's part of life. And that's a great story because nobody who's listening understands what the hell's going on anyway, and the last thing you want to do is bring attention to it.
Yeah, exactly. They don't know. They don't know that we're hearing the other team's announcers. So just kind of go with the flow. And, it kind of taught me that, whatever is going wrong and stuff, as you say, stuff goes wrong a lot, or you don't like the way it sounds in your headset. And, sometimes you'd have an echo or something weird like that to, just not let that bother you. Just go right ahead and, make it sound like there's nothing wrong.
We brought you on because of the induction on May 21st of Voice of the Rangers and Eric Nadel. You did win the Ford C. Frick Award back in 2014. I remember that moment. Had you ever been to, I can't imagine you hadn't been, but what was the first time you'd ever been to Cooperstown?
I used to go to summer camp up in the Catskill Mountains, and a certain age group would get taken to Cooperstown every year. And I got to go 2 years in a row where we would see they called it the Hall of Fame game. There was actually an exhibition game played every summer between two big league teams. And I got to go see, those games twice. I think when I was 13 and 14. I got to go to Cooperstown, and, we had a little bit of time to go through the Hall of Fame and then watch that game at Doubleday Field. So I had been there a couple of times. And then the Rangers actually played in that game one year when I was starting to do the Rangers. It was early in my Rangers career. So I think I'd been there 3 times already before the induction in 2014.
You've been a part of many Hall of Fames, and you'll be a part of another one. Eric, always appreciated your access and insight whenever I saw you, first of all, when I started covering training camps in Port Charlotte. And then, of course, throughout your career, proud of what you've done and what you represent. We appreciate your time. Looking forward to seeing you May 21st.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
That's Eric Nadel, Ford Frick Award winner, Rangers Hall of Fame, Baseball Hall of Fame, and now will be a part of the Texas Sports Hall of Fame.
Yeah, Willie Calhoun stuff is just bizarre. Like, this has been a weird fit. I mean, they purchased a square to fit into a circle, and they've just kind of been dragging it on for, 3-4 years now?
Yeah, since they got, Yu Darvish, or traded Yu Darvish, and Yu Darvish has figured out what's going on with him, and has blossomed in a couple places, and then here Willie Calhoun just hasn't fit.
Yeah, well, and they haven't really let him fit either.
Yeah.
Like, they've just kind of been herky-jerk with him. It's very strange how that's all unfolded. I don't know. It just feels like they haven't ever really been all in with him for whatever reason. But, yeah, I mean, he's going to be on his way out, obviously, and always good to hear Eric Nadel's voice. That's a lot of anytime I hear his voice, that's my childhood right there. So always fun to talk to him. And I really was curious about the Spanish speaking because he's become, fluent. And I think it's awesome that he's taken the steps to learn the language and, did so out of, not his own self, improvement as much as it was for the guys who he's interviewing all the time. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Willie